night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
Tonight, Courtney Weber will be with us. She is a witch, a tarot advisor, and an author. We're going to talk about her new book called The Morrigan, Celtic Goddess of Magic and Might. But we're going to talk about a lot more than that. We're also going to talk about what it means to be a witch. What does that mean when it comes to witchcraft and magic? What does it mean to the people who view you, maybe with a cocked eye? That's what we're going to chat about tonight, and we're really, really excited about all of that. Please support the program. Go to patreon.com/Johhaw. That's Johhaw. We have a great YouTube channel, and you need to go there and subscribe. Just go to YouTube, search for J.V. Johnson. You'll find the channel, subscribe to it. It's not only where we have an archive of about 500 back episodes of this program, but we also have bonus content, special content, and then also when we're live and we're streaming live with audio, we have a great chat room as well. We take questions from the chat room. We pay attention to suggestions and comments from our chat room, so it's a great way to be involved in the program. Again, YouTube, just search for J.V. Johnson. You'll find it, subscribe, and you'll be all set. Tonight, we're talking with Courtney Weber. Courtney is a witch, an author, a tarot advisor, and an activist. She's the author of Brigid, History, Mystery, and Magic of the Celtic Goddess, and another book called Tarot for One, The Art of Reading for Yourself. And she's got another book coming out called The Morrigan, Celtic Goddess of Magic and Might. So there's a lot going on. She's also the co-host of That Witch Life podcast. Courtney has produced and designed tarot for of the Burrows, which is a modern tarot deck in New York City. We're going to have her explain that to us because it sounds very interesting. And she's also been featured in the New York Times, in Maxim, in Playboy, the Huffington Post, Vice, and the Tom Hartman Show. You can check out our website at CourtneyAWeber.com. Courtney, welcome to Beyond Reality. It's great to have you here with us tonight.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Before we get into this conversation, I was just, reading a little bit about what you've done. I've got to ask you about this tarot deck, which is about the boroughs of New York. Tell me what this is about.
Well, I lived in New York City for 13 years, and I was reading tarot on the side because when you're in New York City, you have more than one job. It's just the way it goes. And I would often read for people in very noisy places, bars, burlesque clubs, and would have to shout my readings at people. And so it was very easy for me to help them understand the reading by drawing parallels with people and situations that they come across every single day. So, for example, if I pulled up, there's a card in the tarot called the King of Pentacles, which is traditionally meant to represent someone who identifies as male, who is also very wealthy, maybe a little bit older. And so if somebody got this card, I might say, hey, this is your boss. Or I'd say, hey, this is going to be you after your promotion. And the more I did that, the more I would see characters as I was walking down the street. And just be embodied by the people that live in New York. So, for example, I would see a pregnant woman walking a small child. I'd say, well, that's the embodiment of the Empress. So, I started working with a photographer, and we were both part of this underground art scene in New York City, and we had a lot of very good friends who were willing to model for us. And the word about the project started to get around, and some very well-known people asked to be a part of it, including Moby, the musician and techno artist that many people are familiar with. He ended up being our King of Pentacles, the wealthy, successful man. So it's a way of taking these very old traditional archetypes and putting them in a modern face. It's starting to look a little vintage now because the deck's about 10 years old. It kind of is obvious because there's a BlackBerry in one of the pictures, and they're using landlines instead of cell phones, and one woman's looking for an address on a piece of paper instead of on her phone. So very quickly it started to look a little bit of its time. But I self-published the deck, and we published about 1,000 copies, And I'm pleased to say, and also sorry to say, that we've sold out of our run.
Wow.
I don't have any more that are available, but I found that they are available on eBay and on Amazon. So people are interested in collectible decks, anything reflecting New York City, or you're a tarot person but are looking for something that's very that really speaks to a contemporary image, where archetypes that you might see every day, as opposed to somebody dressed like they're from the Renaissance. They're dressed like they're ready for the boardroom or the dance club or something like that.
So I have to ask you, and this is way premature in our conversation because I had a whole section about talking about tarot with you, but we're kind of ahead, but I can't help but ask these questions. So you replaced in this tarot deck, you replaced those images that we're used to seeing, as you indicated, kind of these characters in what would be considered Renaissance garb, with images of modern folks, assuming basically the role of what that archetype might be, and that's what the deck is. So when you're using this tarot deck and you're putting the cards out in front of you, you're seeing those images that you took and your photographer took of people that you were using as models, if you will, in New York City, and that replaces those Renaissance images.
That's correct.
So I've got to ask you this then. It sounds kind of cool, and I love the way it brings something that might be a little bit more difficult to understand closer to home for people to kind of grasp. But you're going to have to explain how the tarot works to begin with, because is there any power in the images themselves in that tarot deck, or any tarot deck? Are the images important, or is it just what the images represent?
So that's a really good question. So the tarot is a deck of cards. It has 78 cards, as most of us know. Our traditional playing cards today have 52 cards. So they are similar. Some of the suits have a lot of resonance with the standard playing cards. But there's also an additional set of 22 what we call trump cards, or the major arcana, which goes through. They really paint the story of a person's life, or as some say that Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. I liken the Fool's Journey a lot. It's often called the Fool's Journey, and I liken it a lot to Lord of the Rings or Wizard of Oz, in which the main character in the story starts out on a quest and meets a bunch of people along the way, faces a number of trials, and then reaches their destiny and finds it achieves what they set out to do. And so when you look at all these cards together, they reflect where you are in your life, and they help provide guidance and insight as to what's going on in your life. There are no cards that are really bad. There are no cards that are really great either. It's just like any experience in life. There are benefits and there are challenges to it. I know in the movies, you'll often see a fortune teller using tarot cards, and she might, it's always a woman, and she might pull a card for the person who has come to see her, and they'll say, oh, this is a bad card, this means bad omens. And in a tarot reading, that's not necessarily true.
You're absolutely right. I think Hollywood has conditioned us to think that, might get the death card. Is there a death card?
Yes, there is a death card. And in some decks, because there's a misnomer about the tarot, and that the images have been in one certain way since the tarot was invented about 600 years ago. And that's just not true. The truth is that tarot was much more of a trick-taking game back in Renaissance. It really originated in Renaissance Italy. And most tarot cards were commissioned by independent artists who would draw the cards with images of the person's family. This is something that only very, very wealthy people were able to do, and so it was a way of commemorating, and through a number of self-portraits, these cards. And so that we're not looking. There was probably a familiar story to the tarot that everybody knew, very much in the way that we all know the story of Lord of the Rings. Even if you haven't seen it, Frodo takes a ring to Mordor. There's a wizard in there, and there's elves. So most people know the basic premise of Lord of the Rings.
Right.
And so at one time there was a story attached to the tarot this way too, and we've lost that story. We don't really know what the characters meant to Renaissance Italy in the way that we know. We have some ideas, but it really wasn't until the 20th century that tarot cards began to take on a kind of mysticism. Certainly, they were used as a fortune-telling device, but so were dice and tea leaves and
bones
and pretty much anything. Yeah, bones, pretty much anything. But it wasn't until the 20th century when you had a group of occultists, mostly wealthy, sitting around board, decided that the tarot actually had secret images that dated back to ancient Egypt, and so they tried to bring that out more in what we know now as the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which is the most common deck and often the one people see most often in movies. That's a long explanation to answer your question about the death card. So yes, there is a death card. In some decks, that's a scary card. In the more familiar tarot, it is a scary card because it's the Grim Reaper on a horse mowing down kings and peasants alike, basically saying it's coming for everybody, you can't stop it. But there are other decks in which there's one of my favorite images of death comes from a deck called the Mother Peace Tarot, in which death you see a skeleton that's quite worn away, curled up in fetal position underneath a tree. And it's just a very natural, gentle-looking death card saying, it's the end of something. So if you're getting a tarot reading and the death card comes up, it may mean that something is coming to an end. It could be a change in your job. It may be a change in a relationship. Rarely have I seen it foretell specifically that someone is going to die. I have seen it come up to indicate an inheritance is coming. I've seen it come up to talk about a death that's happened in the past. I think the tarot doesn't want to frighten us. And so I have yet to see the death card specifically say someone is going to die. It normally has to do with a transition. And to be fair, it does represent transitions that don't always feel good. Losing your job never feels good, but sometimes it can lead to a better job. Losing a relationship rarely feels good, but it can and often does lead to a better one after that. But those moments feel like deaths in some way. When people say, what am I going to do? I read for a woman a couple of years ago, and I don't remember the reading, but she wrote to me and said that I vaguely remember that she got the death card in her reading, and I told her she was going to have to say goodbye to something. And she wrote to me about 3-4 months later and said that reading had been accurate. She realized that a dream she had been pursuing either wasn't what she wanted anymore or it was no longer feasible for her. And so she did say goodbye to this dream she'd been pursuing for a very long time, and that gave her freedom to pursue something else.
So if you pull this particular card, and we don't need to necessarily focus on this death card, but I'm curious about it in this instance. When you pull that, how can you determine whether or not that card at that moment refers to, as you just said, maybe a career change or the person themselves? Maybe I don't know if it ever indicates that they may have to worry about something physically for themselves. Does it relate to the card pulled before or after? Or how does that work? I mean, how can you determine where that death card is going to be applied?
Well, I often ask, I'm what they call an anarchistic tarot reader, so I don't really use a traditional spread, a tarot spread, meaning you place this card here and it means this thing, you place this card here and it means that thing. I just put the cards out and I just talk with them. I've been doing this a very long time, so I have that rapport with the tarot. And so if I were to pull a death, so typically if somebody's asking for a reading and they're not sure where they're going in life, I might say, pull a card to ask the spirits, can you tell me where this person is in their journey right now? And I would pull one single card. Now, if that card was death, I'd immediately say, we're at a place of transition. And if this often especially to alleviate someone's nerves, I'll pull a couple of other cards to accompany and say, tell me more about this transition. If I find that a lot of the cards tend to relate to money or material things, I would believe that it's probably having to do something either something to do with business or work. If I get a lot of cards that are about cups, which represent water and more emotions, I might think this probably has something to do with a relationship. Wands would probably be something about health or passion. And swords might be about, might be similar to the young woman's reading I was just talking about, and that there was direction and drive, but then the battle has been ended. So what was the battle is when we start to unpack and find some really interesting things. So to answer your question, it does have a lot to do with the other cards that are pulled.
So what if I were to ask you, if I say, Courtney, I want a 1-card reading and I want to know about my health, and you pull the death card, should I be concerned?
I would probably then definitely pull some other cards to see what.
Okay, so you'd look for clarification.
What are we worried about? So the first thing I'd say is if you got the death card, I'd say there's a reason to pause, and that there's a chance that you need to give something up, or the cards want you to change directions.
Interesting. And again, I didn't mean to lead this conversation talking so much about the tarot, but what about the future? Can you, through a tarot card reading, predict somebody's future, or maybe just the future in general?
Yes, you can. And I can be wary about focusing too much on people's future because they get very wrapped up in it. I have some clients that they want to know all the details about the person they're going to marry. And so I start pulling cards and start telling them what I see. And if there's any piece of that puzzle that they don't necessarily like, they start to get very upset, thinking that their life is going to be unhappy because there's one detail that the cards say is about the person they're going to meet. And I have to remind them, you don't know what's coming and you don't know where your life's going to be. When I met my husband, I had already sworn off long-distance relationships. I said, there's no way I'm doing another long-distance relationship. It's too hard. And if somebody had looked at my future and said, well, you're going to be in a long-distance relationship, I would have said, forget it, no, and I would have been angry. Angry at the reading and angry at the situation. But when I met my husband, he was absolutely worth the distance, and our schedules were compatible, so that made it work. And it wasn't that hard. Of course, we missed each other, but we found that we hit a good rhythm. And so I try to tell people that, don't be too upset when you hear aspects about your future that don't sound like what you want, because you're not there yet, and you don't know how your life is going to gently shift and accommodate some of the things that perhaps you don't think can be accommodating, and that kind of thing. So but it was very funny. I had somebody come back to me recently because he had asked about a woman what his romantic future was like. And I don't remember this reading, but he told me that I had told him a certain woman was coming and that she would have a child of about a certain age, and the child would have a couple of health issues, and that the two of them together would hit it off really well, but the relationship would be very difficult and would ultimately end. And there were a couple of other specifics that I'm not recalling at the moment. But apparently every single one of those things came true. Mm. And he didn't want to believe it at first because when he met this woman, he really liked her. So he's like, well, she couldn't have been right about all the problems. But then as he got deeper into the relationship, everything that the tarot had warned him about was coming to fruition. It's a little harder when it comes to world events. I have pulled cards to see about the future with climate change and the future with other things, and you get a very mixed picture, and that sometimes those cards can be the scariest that I've seen when I'm looking at what's happening in the future. But I think also I have to remind myself there's a lot of context I'm missing. I don't know where humanity is going to be and how we're going to be addressing the challenges that I see in the cards, and it may be not nearly as insurmountable as it seems.
Where does the power come from? Where does the direction come from that allows these cards to offer this type of guidance?
Well, here we are talking about on a show called Beyond Reality, so I'm sure many of your listeners will be on the same page here. The truth is that I don't know. I do believe that there are spirits that walk among us, and I do believe that when you can build the tarot as a tool, it's a tool that the spirits can use to communicate with you. But every time I've started to go in the direction where I think that the tarot is just what you make it, it's like an ink blot test, and that I start to kind of move into the more agnostic, atheist realm, something will happen in which no rational explanation that it comes down to that the most rational explanation is that there are spirits making it work, because you just can't think of another reason.
Yeah.
And one of my primary stories about this was a number of years ago, back when I was still reading in the burlesque clubs. I was reading for one of the dancers that I hadn't seen her in a really long time, and was like, "Oh, come on over here. I'll read your cards." And she sat down, and the cards kept showing cards about about mothers and cards of warning. So there was just kept saying, "Warning, mother, warning, mother, warning, mother." And I said, "How's your mom doing?" She's like, "She's fine. Just saw her today. She's great." And I said, "Okay, well, the cards seem worried about her. Are you sure she's all right?" "Oh yeah, she's fine." Pulled some more cards. Same thing. It repeated over and over again that there was something very, very wrong with a mother figure. And eventually I apologized to her, and I said, "I think I'm off my game tonight, or I'm picking up on someone else's reading, because I just can't seem to get them to say anything else, and you say they're mistaken." And she was fine. She went along. But later that week, her mother got a cancer diagnosis.
Ooh.
So this wasn't on her mind. This wasn't even on her mother's mind. And it certainly wasn't on mine. But the tarot was like, "You need to take care of your mom," and they were screaming about it.
Yeah.
So another time this was one of my favorite stories. My husband and I laugh at this one quite a bit. I was seeing a woman I'd never met before came to our home for a reading, and my husband was in the kitchen, and I'm sitting in the living room reading to her. And it kept saying that there was justice regarding the past. Justice and the past. It kept saying over and over again she needed justice for her past. And I asked her about it, and I said, what is it that you need justice for with regards to your past? And she said, "Nothing. I don't have that issue." And we kept talking, and she kept asking about when she was going to meet someone. Same card said justice for the past. She could not have love until she got justice for the past. And I just said, let's talk a little bit more about your last relationship, because they keep saying that there's something about justice. And she says, "No, he's fine. We're friends. Sometimes he does break into my apartment and he's in my bed naked when I come home." And I went, "Oh, what?" And she said, "Yeah, he climbs up the fire escape and he comes in the window, and I never know when it's going to be. And he sometimes he threatens me that he's going to kill himself or kill me if I date someone else." And I said, "Okay, so the justice for the past is the cards are saying you need a restraining order against your ex."
Right. Wow.
And so when she left, my poor husband came out of the kitchen, looked at me like, "Did I just hear what I think I heard? Because that sounds really terrible."
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you handle something like that? I mean, obviously now all of a sudden you feel for the woman's safety. In addition to all of that,
there's only so much that you can do. If the person does not want help, there's really nothing that you can do. Now, if she had come to me and she were in tears, she's like, "I can't go home because I think he's going to be there."
Right.
Then we would have been like figuring out resources together. But she actually seemed kind of excited by it, and she's like, "Well, whatever," and didn't seem like it was something she wanted to address. So as a reader, I have learned very quickly not to get personally invested in my clients' choices. Now, this doesn't mean that I don't care or I don't care about them, but it also means that I'm going to tell them what I see, and they're going to take my advice or not. And so if I sit around and I worry, "Oh, God, is she going to go back to him after I told her what would happen?" then I'm going to make myself crazy. And it's their life. If that's the life they want to lead and they want to make those kind of mistakes, it's on them, and it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise it would eat you up. I mean, obviously, it would eat you up.
I mean, there's days when it gets hard. This next story has a bit of violence to it. Is it okay for your audience, or should I?
No, I think it's good. We're a late night audience. Let's go for it.
Okay, so just content warning for anybody who doesn't want to hear about the violent situation. Very sweet young woman also came to see me a few years ago, and she wanted to talk about a number of things in her life, including love. And she sat there with a little smile on her face as I was reading for her. And I looked down and I said, what it said is that her ex had stolen something from her of great value. And I told her, I told her what I saw, and she just kind of smiled, and she said, yes, I was pregnant, and he beat me until I miscarried. And then he went out and celebrated while I was in the hospital.
Oh, my God.
And I said, okay, well, that is something stolen that was of great value, because it was a wanted pregnancy for her anyway. And she was struggling because her family was trying to push her to forgive him. And she wasn't ready to forgive him. And I think she was looking for someone to say, you don't have to forgive him. And that's what she got from me.
I hope regardless of whether she was considering it or not, she was doing it all, with bars between her and he was in prison. Did he go to jail for that?
I don't remember.
Wow.
I think he may have. It's been a long time since I read for this woman. So wherever she is, I hope that she is well and safe.
Yeah. What a story.
So, yeah, it's sometimes as a tarot reader, as I say, oftentimes I find you find yourself saying, this is way above my pay grade, especially when I was working the psychic hotline and was getting phone calls from all over the world.
Oh, my God.
Of people, and a lot of glimpses into what's going on in our United States of America in different places. And I had people come at me online saying, you're a fraud, and if you want to help people, you should become a psychologist. And I said, you know what? There are people. I said, first, you're assuming I've got money for school like that.
Yeah.
Second of all, you're assuming that if I do that I'll still be able to be available to these people.
Right.
Financial. When I was really poor and I needed talk therapy, it was very hard to get.
Yeah.
And so it's sometimes you just need someone to hold your secrets. And the tarot reader is in a way like a priest, but we don't have any code of judgment. That's something when I was growing up Catholic, you go kneel in the box, you tell the priest your deepest secrets, and then you're supposed to feel better, but there's always a sense in which you knew he had a code of how you were supposed to behave.
Right.
And you went to see the priest because you knew you'd already broken that code.
Right.
The tarot reader, it's not that. And I've had people come to me crying because they're dating a married man and they feel terrible about it. And I'm just like, sweetheart, you're not telling me anything I haven't heard already tonight from someone else. So you're not the worst person in the world. You're in a painful situation, but we're going to talk through it.
I've already determined that we probably should have scheduled you for the whole week because you've got a lot of great things to talk about. I have one more question about tarot before we go to break here, and when we come back, I want to get into talking about what it's like to be a witch. But this death card that we kind of opened this conversation up on, who did you convince to play that character to be photographed for your deck that relates to New York City? Did you pick someone special out?
It's funny. I did pick someone special out, but I didn't have to ask anyone. So the inspiration for the death card was with the street side memorials that I would often see in my neighborhood. So in many places in New York, especially older neighborhoods that have not been gentrified, if somebody passes away in a building, there will normally be a shrine out on the sidewalk with pictures, and people can leave flowers and they'll light candles, and just to let people know that somebody who lived in the building had passed away, and it's a community way for people to honor that death. And so I built one, and with pictures of a friend of mine who had been an actress, and she'd passed away a couple of years before that. So I built her a shrine out on the sidewalk. And we lit candles, and it was a wonderful rainy night. So something about rain and seeing umbrellas in the background, and that to me encapsulated so much of New York City. And I did not live in New York City during 9/11, but a very good friend of mine did, and she said that the death card in our deck really struck her because after 9/11, there were those memorials everywhere, and so that image really punched her in the soul. Because it was real, and if you live in New York for any period of time, you're going to see one of those shrines, and so that was my death card.
Tonight we're talking with Courtney Weber. Courtney is a witch, an author, and a tarot advisor, also an activist. She's got several books to her credit, including The Morrigan, Celtic Goddess of Magic and Might. Now, Courtney, just so I understand, is The Morrigan yet to be released, or has it been released already?
It's actually been released. It came out in November.
Okay, so it's been out for a few months then. Okay, and where are all your books available? Just so we get that out of the way.
Well, I always tell people to please go to your independent bookstores first and ask for them. If they don't carry them, then they may be able to order them for you, but it's really important that we support our local shops. They are available on Amazon. Make that your second choice if you can't get it from an independent bookseller. And depending on where you are in the country, you may be able to get it at Barnes & Nobles. I learned this, Barnes & Nobles are zoned differently depending on the area. So if you live in the Bible Belt, Barnes & Nobles will not be carrying my book. I've asked. Yeah. They don't do it.
Wow.
But if you're on the West Coast or in the Northeast, you're likely to find it at Barnes & Noble. But again, try your local metaphysical bookstore first or independent bookstore, and if they don't have it, order it online or see if the bookstore has it. And just whatever you do, it's really helpful to authors if you can rate and review the book, especially if you like it. You don't have to like it to review it, but especially if you do, it's really, really helpful.
Just to follow up on your point, supporting our local, whether they're mom and pop or independent bookstores, is very, very important. And I don't stop just at bookstores. I say this about every kind of retail store. I mean, we've watched the decimation of our main streets and our downtowns in all communities. It's not just the internet that's doing it. There's a lot of factors. However, anytime that you can support one of your local retailers, just like Courtney, I highly recommend it as well. It's that important, isn't it, Courtney?
It really is, and it's we have, my husband and I have a very large dog, and we have two very needy cats, and we do order our pet food from Chewy because it helps save us some money in the long run. But for everything else that we need for our pets, we go to an independent pet store because they know our pets, they know what they need. And then it's a chance to ask people questions like, should I look at this harness or that one? It's one thing to look online and read reviews. It's something else to actually talk to a professional who can help you make the best choice for what your needs are. And, when you buy from an independent store, you're supporting someone's health insurance. You're ensuring that their lights stay on and that their kids can have ballet lessons and those things. Whereas you're going to a big chain, where people are being paid very, very little, you're lining a CEO's pocket. So you ask yourself, where would you rather have your money go?
Let's talk about what I had intended to start our conversation with tonight, and that is the idea of being a witch. So let's start with the definition of the word witch. What is the definition to you?
Oh, gosh. It's so funny. On my podcast, we ask everybody when they first come on the show how they knew they were a witch. And the stories are all so very different, but they have a very similar through line in that they just knew somehow that they were a little different, that they saw the world in a different way, that they felt that there was a presence of something there that wasn't. To me, being a witch is being in touch with the unseen and having a gift to be able to receive messages from that unseen. I know for me, I've been able to sense the presence of spirit since I was very little. I've always been someone who's had prophetic dreams, and so in that way, I always knew that things were different. And I felt that there was a power and a magic to the world that was shaped through my faith and through spirit, but I wasn't quite getting there through the religions of my youth. I was trying. I really believed that it was possible, but I couldn't quite get there. So I think that might be something that a lot of people relate to. I especially felt the presence of a divine spirit or many different spirits when I was in places of very great wild beauty, such as the Pacific Ocean. Or the mountains, or being in the forest. It felt like there was something, a presence there with me, looking after me, or communicating with me, and that sort of thing. So, yeah, that makes sense to your listeners.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I got an understanding of what the definition is, though. I mean, I get what you're saying, and you say the people who identify this way have these sensitivities, these feelings, these observations, and a bit of a sense that they don't kind of fit into the what we might call the mainstream. But I mean, the definition for a very long time was one that was created by religion. Obviously, that's not what you're talking about. So, what is the definition? Am I pressing that a little too hard?
No, you're not pressing it too hard, but I think it's. I think the definition is very broad, and it depends on who you ask. So, I guess to say it's a very subjective term. To me, at the end of the day, someone who casts spells and practices magic and working with spirits is a witch. There's a lot of people now using the term witch, and I don't really have a problem with it, but I don't fully agree with it. When it comes to feminism or art or even rebellion against patriarchy, and all of those things are wonderful. But if somebody is not actually casting spells and that invoking spirits in order to make change in the lives of themselves, the lives around them, then they're not a witch. They may be witchy, they may be witch adjacent, but to me, a witch is the basic definition of being a witch is someone who is actually practicing magic, casting spells in order to make change.
Okay, that helps. One of the things I noticed on your website, when you kind of define yourself on the website, you don't use the word witch in the beginning of the definition. In fact, you use Wiccan priestess. So, are those interchangeable?
That's up for debate. Wicca as a religion really came into being in the early 20th century, and it was an attempt to find a religion for people who identified as witches. And it comes from the term wicca, which is an old English term that loosely means like a magical person, as some might now call a shaman. That's a very loose connection, but probably the best one that I can come up with right now. And so, or basically just someone who's considered a magic maker. And it was thought that the word witch came from that. I'm not sure if that's exactly the etymology of it, but it really was an attempt to build a religion based on witchcraft. And my journey through witchcraft and the Wiccan religion has taken a lot of twists and turns over the last few years. It was easier for me for a long time I am a Wiccan priestess. I've been initiated in Wiccan traditions and, ordained as a priestess in them. So that is correct. But for many years, I lost touch with witchcraft in many ways and was just focusing on running rituals and running a religion and basically being a minister. And I lost touch with what I was supposed to do, and so it's in the last couple of years I've been less of an organized religious figure and more of back to the witchcraft and once again. But I am careful how I post it, especially on my website, because people have different expectations. I'm fortunate in that I haven't dealt with a lot of vitriol every once in a while, but mostly it's people asking for very extreme things that I don't want to be involved with. I did have somebody email me from India asking if I would cast a spell to cause his father's death.
Ooh.
He wanted him to die so he could have his inheritance so he could move to the United States. Yeah. And I don't really need that kind of attention from people like that. So it's been more recent that I've been coming back into the witch term, but there's a very specific demographic that can be drawn by using that term. So I'm careful when I put it out there.
You gave us a nice description of how somebody might realize that they're a witch or want to identify as a witch. And you talked about feeling a little bit out of place, maybe having some sensitivities, recognizing things in the world around them that others might not recognize. When did all that happen for you?
I feel like it's always been that way. My dad says that even when I was a very little girl, I saw the world differently than other people did. And I used to try to cast spells in my bedroom, I cast spells on my stuffed animals, trying to get them to come to life.
Did it work ever? Did it ever work, Courtney?
It never worked. It never worked. There's a family story about how we moved from Tennessee to Oregon when I was 6 years old, and I really missed my friends. And I don't know where, but I started to believe fervently that it would be possible for me to walk through my closet and into Tennessee if I could just find this one key that would unlock this magic portal in my closet. And when my sister and I were visiting our grandmother in California, we found a key in one of her junk drawers that had T on it. So we were like, oh, my God, this must be the key to Tennessee. And so you can imagine how hard a 10-hour drive is for a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old anyway. But when that 4-year-old and 6-year-old believe they have a magic key, that at the end of the 10-hour drive, there's a magic portal in their closet, that was a really, really difficult day.
Yeah, understandably.
Yeah, and so we got home and we raced upstairs and we flung open my closet door and there was no portal. And my little sister was trying to twist the air with the key, maybe that it was an invisible door. And I think we visited every closet in the house trying to find that portal, and we did it. But the world didn't get less magical for me that day. If nothing else, I think it just kept me chasing it. But what I would tell my 6-year-old self now is that magic doesn't defy the law of physics, and you may this key to Tennessee may actually just mean that you're going to hear from your old friends, or that this key is going to help you stay in communication with them. It's going to keep those channels open so you don't lose touch with them. So even though you can't walk through your closet and end up in Tennessee, you can still use magic to keep those relationships alive. I think coming back to your question of how I just knew that I was different, I was able to summon spirits if I wanted to. I had a couple of things manifest a few times as, when I was a child. I was able to, ask the spirits, make the phone ring. The phone would ring, right? And there'd be nobody on the other line, on the other end. But as I got older, it was more about that I could look at somebody and I could know what had happened to them, and be able to read, just basically look at them and say, this is what's happened to you. I don't do that so much anymore because I think that's very invasive. So I've shut those portals down. I just open them up when it comes time to do the tarot. But there was a sense of just knowing things before they happened, or after they had happened, and nobody could have told. So
I need to ask you more about this ability to have spirits manifest. Could you actually make them materialize in front of you? Could you see them?
No, but that was something I specifically didn't want to happen, because I was, as much as I wanted communication with spirits, I was also very afraid of them. So actually just a few years ago, I was doing some trance work with one of my teachers, in which the exercise involves going into the spirit world and crossing a bridge. And when I went down there, apparently my bridge had been blown apart by what looked like an Uzi. So, because when I was a kid, I felt them, but I was so afraid of seeing one. I'm like, I don't want to see, I don't want to see, I don't want to see. So I coded that with the spirit world. Like, I don't materialize in front of me. Find another way to let me know you're here, but I do not want to see you. And for the most part, that worked. There have been a couple of times I've seen things that were like, okay, yep, that was real.
Yeah.
But the spirits and I have a good relationship now, where I prefer that if they want to talk to me, it's they come in a dream in a way that doesn't scare me. So that's how we communicate for the most of the time now, is if I will normally just will speak when I sleep.
When you say you communicate with spirits, obviously you could connect with them and you could ask them to show you signs of their presence, that kind of thing. But, a medium will actually have what they would consider to be conversations with spirits. Are you able to do those types of things?
I have. It's very draining, and so I don't do it a lot. But there, especially in very extreme circumstances. I know there was one friend of mine who was I forget why we decided to do this, but I did this massive healing on her, where she was just all locked up, and I performed a ritual for her, and she started crying, and she realized that she was just at her core, very angry, and she had never been angry before. She said that that's one emotion she had managed to push away and hide behind sadness, frustration, what have you, but the anger really flooded in. And it came from her, and she said that it started when she had not been allowed to go to her grandfather's funeral when she was very little. And I, all of a sudden I heard like an old man say, "Tell her pandas, say pandas." And I looked at her and I said, "Pandas?" And she started laughing because she had worn a T-shirt with pandas on it on the day of her grandfather's funeral when her mother had made her go to school instead of going to his service. And so that memory had really been locked in her, and that was a way of her grandfather letting her know through me that he saw her, he was there with her, and he remembered her, and that, because that was something that was so key to her.
How does that ability, that connection with the spirit world factor into your life as a witch or as a Wiccan priestess? Are the two necessarily codependent, or are they two very independent things?
Well, the spirits talking with me as a witch is definitely definitely they're related, because I just don't think that witches are witches if they don't have some kind of communication with the spirit world. It doesn't mean that every witch is a medium. It doesn't mean that every one of them has auditory conversations with spirits.
Yeah. I'm going to say that's a little unusual. I've talked to a lot of witches on the program, and this is the first time I've talked to someone who talks about being witch, but also has this medium angle to it as well.
Yeah, it's funny because I know a lot of witches who are mediums, but I think that there's got to be some kind of connection with the spirit world. And maybe it's not even the human dead. There's a lot of great witches out there that their communication is more with plant or animal spirits, or with other divine beings. And I call all of that as part of the spirit world.
Yeah.
For me, a lot of it is with the ancestors and the dead, because I do feel that there's a really wonderful book. Oh gosh, if I could just remember what it was called. It's on my shelf over here. It'll come to me in a second. I can see it. It's an old. The languageness is old, so it's pretty insulting and condescending and colonialist. But it's called Primitive Mythology, The Masks of God, and it's by Joseph Campbell. And I wasn't crazy about all the things that Joseph Campbell said. Again, this is white man wrote this in like the 1930s or 40s. Or even earlier than that. And so, much earlier than that. So there's a very cultural and a timestamp on this that not as friendly today. However, what I do like about the book is that he interviews a number of priests of indigenous faiths. And almost all of them, it's traced back to communication and honoring their ancestors. And to me, that is the oldest form of human deity worship, is this connection with the people who have gone before you. So I feel like Abrahamic faiths are probably are kind of a break from that, and this belief that the God is kind of disembodied from the planet and the world's experience, but. Going back since humans first climbed out of trees and started walking upright, we've been honoring our dead and therefore communicating with them. And so I feel that what I do in communicating with spirits and with ancestors is replicating this incredibly ancient tradition in human history. And now we may call it the realm of the witches. In a different culture or a different time, and would have called it something else.
But again, tonight we're talking with Courtney Weber. Her website is her name, CourtneyAWeber.com. Was I right, Courtney? Is the A middle initial?
Yes, the middle name is Allison. Really great Southern name when I was in trouble as a little girl. Courtney Allison.
So it's CourtneyAWeber.com. That's the website. A lot of great stuff there. I want to ask about being a witch again. I want to know, is that something that you think you're born with, that, I don't know what it's called, a propensity, or is it something that you learn along the way?
It's both. I liken it to singing. Some people are born with just phenomenal singing voices. They can just, they're prodigies. They're incredible. Some people are born with some real raw ability that they can hone and shape and become very, very good. And there are some people that are always going to struggle with it. But they probably still have one karaoke song that they will get everybody to cheer for them if they pull it out, and they can all certainly join in with Happy Birthday or a good Christmas carol. So everybody can do it. Some people are born with more ability than others, and most people can, with some work, can get to a place where it's a usable tool for them. I find that I'm probably someone who's in the middle. I wouldn't say that I'm one of these prodigy witches that are just like blow your mind all of their lives. They have these very powerful abilities, but I was born with ability, and I've done okay with it. So I'd say I'm in the middle.
What is the ability component of this? Is that the ability to affect magic? Is it the ability to connect with the spiritual world? What's the ability part? I think
it's absolutely. So I think that there are some people who were born in which they're aware of spirits and talking to spirits from a very early age. I find that the more gifted someone is with their abilities, like the more open they are to spirits, the more they've been seeing them since they were younger, the more they tend to reject the gift, and they don't want anything to do with it, and they don't talk about it. They tend to to shut it down, and they don't want anything. They don't want it. I find the people who really embrace the term witch and start researching and learning how to cast spells and actually doing the magic are people who are more in the middle. They're born with some ability, and it's made them curious and thirst for more because they're not drowning in it. So they're the ones that end up doing a lot of the magic work. But there are some people that I think that the ability to see and communicate with spirits is more common than perhaps the ability to cast spells and make them happen. But everybody, especially in the pre-industrial age or in out in the country where you're not so absorbed with the vibrations of city life, most people know someone who, if they pray over you, you're going to get better, right? Or if there's belief that some people have a certain touch where if they can rub a blister or they lick a burn and they can heal it. They just have that ability.
Those people are called moms. Just by the way.
Well, yeah, but it's like when I was in Ireland, there were stories about healers who could remove tumors just by placing their hands on someone in the right way. Or there was a story of a woman who could cure warts, I think, by licking them. So if you had a wart, then you go see her and she licked the wart.
Ooh.
I know it sounds pretty awful, but she had this ability. If she licked the wart, then the wart would heal. There was just something in her that had this ability. That someday we may find that her saliva contained a specific chemical that was the right composition for getting rid of a wart.
Right.
Or she may have just had that specific healing ability. And I've heard of stories about faith healers that were strong enough where if somebody's in the hospital, they would call the phone and somebody would hold the phone over the sick person, and just them praying through the phone would cause this person to heal. Sometimes you've also heard about people who are weather witches, and that when they get angry, they can cause a storm, right? Or when they're happy, they can bring the sun out. So there's stories about people who are just able to just do things. I knew a witch who said that she was always, she had a kind of energy that got people pregnant really easily. So like if somebody wanted to get pregnant, they just go meet up with her, shake her hand. And if they had a hard time getting pregnant before, they could just go get pregnant now, So she said she tried to change it to be like, I'm going to turn this into fertility of the pocketbook so I can, create more money in people's lives. And she's like, it doesn't work. She says, I help people make babies. She says, I don't know, being around me and people get pregnant, but Or if they ask me, if they tell me they want to get pregnant, I'll just think about them and then they will. But she says, I can't make it work with money though.
That's too bad. Tell us what happened to you when you were 20. On your 20th birthday, you had kind of an important moment in your life.
Yeah, so I was in New Hampshire. I was in college, and I went to college in my hometown, and I was so very ready to get out of town and wanted to explore the world. So I applied for a summer job at a theater company as far away as I could possibly get, which was New Hampshire. And it actually was a very lonely summer for me. It was my first time away from home, and I struggled with homesickness far more than I'd imagined, which is very funny considering how badly I'd wanted to get out of town. It was actually very disorienting for me. And I had a hard time connecting with people. I think I might have come across as very needy, and so people really just weren't into connecting. And so I spent a lot of time out in the woods. I thought, if I can't make human friends, I'm going to make friends with these trees. And I was just sitting in a tree one day, and it was my 20th birthday. And I said, so what am I going to do now that I'm 20? Maybe it's time to find my religion. And because I had really let go of my Catholic upbringing. And so then I just I remember looking up at the tree and said, am I a witch? And I felt like this excitement in the air around me, as if all the spirits were like, thank God, she finally figured it out. And I was suddenly just elated, and I went running back in to the theater and started hugging everybody, which I'm sure was annoying. But I was just full of this joy because I'd figured out what to call myself. It suddenly clicked. I imagined that people who are anyone who's had, questions about their identity, whether it's about a religion, a political affiliation, or, even a sexual orientation, in the moment when it clicks, there's joy, there's also fear. What am I going to do? How do I tell people this? What does this mean for me?
Right.
Right. What are my parents going to say? But it's also the sense of, I know myself now.
Did you get any backlash?
I kind of trickled out of the closet and out of the broom closet, and my parents figured it out. And at first they were concerned because but they were also very devout capitalists. And so they were very afraid that I was never going to get a job, or that I was, people were going to think I'm weird. I was never going to meet anybody.
Did you say devout capitalists or Catholics?
Yes. Devout capitalists.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I think for a long time because I discovered this in college about me, and they were afraid that I was going to wreck my college career. Well, I graduated with honors, so there goes that concern. And then they were afraid I wasn't going to get a job. Well, I got a job immediately after school in my field. Okay, well, there goes that concern. And then I applied to a number of grad schools for creative writing and didn't get into any of them. And my mom said it was because I didn't want to read anything witchy. And I said, I didn't write anything witchy. And so it has nothing to do with that. The reason I didn't get into grad school is my portfolio wasn't what they were looking for. And so, there goes that. And then they're saying, well, you're never going to meet anybody. You're not going to meet anybody of substance. Nobody's going to want to date you or marry you if you're a witch. Well, then I met my husband, who's wonderful, and he was everything that a parent would want for their child. Good, steady job, family oriented, takes care of his mom, and he's also a witch. So they're like, okay, well, there goes that. They just couldn't. Every time they were worried about something, it would become something else. So then my mom would say, well, I'm worried about how people are going to perceive you. But then her friends started to come to me for tarot readings. So there goes that. It's just like, finally, I think she just gave up and was like, I think was often worried. And my family, both sides of my extended family are very, very conservative. We're the most liberal branch of all of them. Many of them were nervous for me. Some of them, I think, are probably still praying for my soul. They're afraid that something bad will happen to me upon my death. At the same time, I'm a good relative. I show up and I behave myself at family gatherings. I take care of my grandmothers, and so their concerns don't match a reality, right? So I've had backlash over the years, and it's come in strange ways. In the last few years, being a witch is now very cool. So I've had people mock it. They thought it was silly. They thought it was, they thought I was being ridiculous or, like I said, witchcraft is very cool now. When I first came into witchcraft, it was probably the dorkiest, uncoolest thing you could possibly be, up there with being a LARPer or a Ren Fair enthusiast, which I also think both of those things are extremely cool. But at the time, those things were the most uncool things that somebody could be. Now all those things are considered awesome. But when, you're first coming into this and you get people that are, they want to try to trick you. They want to try to make yourself look like a fraud and say, well, you have to tell me something about myself that nobody knows. And I said, it's not a party trick. I'm not doing that. I'm not sure. I'm not here to prove myself to you.
Right.
Atheists get mad at religion anyway, but I feel like they get really mad at witchcraft in particular. And I think it's because of a lack of understanding of thinking that witches believe they can transcend physics. And I certainly don't. I think that physics and magic and science are all really good friends. And I don't see any reason why I'm not, so once, sit down with someone who's is an atheist, very scientific minded, we find out we actually have quite a bit in common in seeing the world in very similar ways. And I remember once I was in a cab with a friend who'd had a little too much to drink. And although she was very artistic and very progressive in many ways, her Pentecostal upbringing had never fully left her. And so she was, pretty deep in her bottle, and she looked at me and she goes, I'm not supposed to be friends with someone like you. And I was just like, why? And she said, because of what you do. And I said, you don't know anything about what I do. And she goes, well, I don't want to know, but I just know what I know. And it was really hurtful.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I was like, oh, right. And sometimes I feel like people tend to put that on display a bit. I've tried to tell some of my friends who are not into witchcraft, like, please don't make that the first thing that you tell people about me when they meet me, because one, I don't want to have to sit here and explain it every single time I'm just shaking hands with somebody, and second of all, sometimes I'm going to end up having to hear all of their psychic experiences all night, and I'm not really in the mood. I'm not on the clock right now. I mean, I get paid to sit and talk to people about this stuff, and suddenly here I'm at the bar. And they're confessing to me the story about this ghost that they saw when they were a kid. They never told anyone. And I have compassion for that. But every single time I go out, if that's what I'm going to hear, I don't want to go out anymore.
Let's talk about magic. How does it work? I mean, most people would have an image, most likely put into their minds through some type of fiction or movie or something that they read or saw. And it's probably not like that at all. So tell me how the actual magic part of all of this works.
So magic is the act of creating change, and it's using the energetic forces around you, the energetic forces of the planet, and through the creation of a mini ritual will basically tell the universe the way you want the world to look. For example, there's a spell I did not too long ago to help a woman get to be with a man she wanted to be with. And so it involved, and he was seeing someone else, but he said he wanted to be with her. So what I did is I got 3 candles. 2 were shaped like women. 1 was shaped like a man. And I faced I tied the man candle and one of the women candle together back to back to represent the relationship that was problematic, and I had him facing her, the woman that he wanted, that she said that they wanted to be together. So I burned these candles, and as the candle burned, and it got low enough down. It burned away the twine of the two that I had connected, and then I moved that male candle closer to the other female candle, and so they would burn together, so that it would basically clear the obstacles for this woman to be with this man. So what I was doing was calling the focus of the spirits and said, listen, this is what we want to see. These two are together and it's not working out. These two want to be together. So we need you to help separate these two and allow these two to come together. And at first it worked, but the problem with the spell was that there was not enough clarity about the man's intentions. And the truth is that he didn't want either one of them to go anywhere. He wanted to keep both those women in his life. So for a while, the spell did work. He and that other woman separated, and he and the woman who had come to me were working on building a relationship. And then the man was like, yeah, actually, though, I still want her as well. So magic works, but sometimes it doesn't change a mindset. Okay, there are plenty of people in this country that if I could use magic to change their mindset about the next political election cycle, I certainly would. But magic doesn't change how we feel, but it does pull on energies that are already within us and can make us make different choices and remove obstacles and make the changes we want to see in the world. And it's a wonderful thing to have happen when you feel like you're out of options, right? I know for me, when my husband and I were living in New York City, I was working a really tough job. It wasn't paying very well, and my boss was just incredibly difficult. And I felt like my every other week I would sigh a bit of a relief when I would see my name on the payroll, because I was never sure when she was going to fire me. And so I would go home every night and just cry. But we were in a tough financial place. So I did a cleansing spell to cleanse our home of financial negativity. So I created a floor wash with a number of different herbs and some yellow flower petals, which then I prayed over it, and I talked to the spirits and said, help me make this water into a magical brew that will remove the financial negativity from my house. So I started by washing from the back of the apartment all the way, and I washed to the front door, so really washing all that stuff away. And then created a new potion, which was to bring financial positivity, which I then threw at my front door. So, and there were all these flower petals and herbs stuck to my door, and my landlord was so mad at me. But I lost my job a week later. And I just had trust. I said, okay, this is part of, actually, maybe it might have been even the day after that, but it was within very short order I was let go. And I was given 1 month severance, and I was like, all right. And then about 2 weeks later, I was offered a new job, and that job was to start in 2 weeks. So the day that my severance ended, my new job began, and it's been the best job I've ever had in my adult life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's been interesting. It's been involving caring for people. It's paid me very well. It's allowed me to travel, and so it was absolutely specifically an embodiment of what I had wanted. I said, get rid of financial negativity, which was a job I hated, that treated me badly, that didn't pay that well, and brought me in financial positivity, which was a job that I loved. And I didn't even know what the job was. I think I had no idea that this kind of job even existed. So it wasn't like, I want this job. It's like, bring me a better job because I need one. And it came. And the spirits took care of me. So, yeah.
What is the, you say that magic draws from the energy around you. Is this natural energy? Is this spiritual energy? Is it both?
I think it's both. I can't see how spiritual energy and natural energy are separate from one another. Yeah, I certainly would say it's both.
And when you said, you gave us a couple of examples of of spells that you incanted, or whatever the word would be, cast. I'm not sure what you would say, but were those something that you had to go to some type of reference to figure out how to do, or do you think through it, figure out what you need to apply to make something happen?
A little of both. I read a lot of spell books, especially read about what the different correspondences for for different herbs and flowers and what they are traditionally known for. Usually you can figure out what an herb can do magically is what it tends to do in nature. So, for example, or you can look into its folk names. So, slippery elm is often an herb that's used to stop gossip. A very old hoodoo spell is to take a cow's tongue and you roll it in slippery elm and you draw it and you hammer a nail through it to stop gossip. And I was curious as to why slippery elm was considered a stop gossip herb. But when I read that one of its folk names is gagweed, that made sense to me because it's literally creating a gag, right? And one day I ended up burning a bunch of walnuts while I was baking, and I didn't want to throw them away. So I was trying to think of what walnut can do magically, and so I started reading about what walnuts do. It turns out the walnut tree, it's kind of excuse my language, the walnut tree is kind of an asshole because it drops its walnuts specifically to prevent other plants from growing, right? Like walnuts are kind of like nature's napalm. You know, it doesn't want anything.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, and so I thought about it and I went, so walnut can stop competition. That's what it does in nature. That's what it will do magically.
Right.
Right. And English ivy. So the Pacific Northwest constantly am battling with lemon balm and blackberry and English ivy. So lemon balm is citrusy. It's actually very good for you. It's got a high content of vitamin C. But anything with citrus is really clean and cleansing and cuts through stuff because it's a very cutting herb. So it's a really good herb for getting rid of negative energy, or if there's big blockages in your life, like creatively, love-wise, with regards to your job front, including some lemon balm, perhaps burning it or using it as a smoke bath or using I love floor washes. It's one of my favorite things to do in spellcraft is to create a magical brew and wash the floors with it because I've had some really powerful things happen magically when I do that. So that's some of the uses of lemon balm. Now, blackberry is a literal barrier. Like you can't get through a blackberry hedge. You get stuck. And so it traps things. It can protect you. Things can't get through. So if you have like a hedge of blackberry around your home, nobody's getting in, for better or worse, right? And so if you want to keep something away, use some blackberry thorn, right? So you might, if you've got like a colleague at work that's making your life miserable and you feel like they're really a threat to you, you get an image of them, you wrap it in blackberry thorn, they can't bother you anymore. They can't get to you, right? So, and then English ivy can grow anywhere and it can take down a giant tree. So if you need, even though it looks very delicate and unassuming, so that's one of the challenges with English ivy is that it looks so pretty, sometimes people don't get rid of it, and then it can bring down a fence or a house or a tree. And so sometimes that energy is helpful, especially you're trying to climb up the ranks, but you don't necessarily want people to see you as competition because then they're going to try to mow you down. So you could, using that energy of English ivy to climb the structure that you want to dominate. So these are, I make it also very clear, you shouldn't be eating English ivy. I wouldn't eat blackberry thorn either. You never know. But you can certainly use pieces of it in your spell work, and it's the energy of the plant saying, hey, when you were out there being a plant, you were doing these things. Now that you're a dried herb in my collection, I invite you to do those things to this task that I have in spiritual form as well.
Let's change the topic. Let's talk about your book, The Morgan. What's the book about?
So the book is about one of an Irish goddess, or sometimes she is known as a collection of goddesses, who comes out of Iron Age Ireland. She is a goddess of many things. She's most famously known for being a goddess of warfare, but she is also very much a goddess of shape-shifting, and she has it's funny, she has a relationship with death. Some people call her a death goddess. I wouldn't necessarily personally call her a death goddess as much as I might call her a death tour guide or a fairy guide. Just someone who helps you cross to the other side. But she's not someone who actually brings death or rescues lots of different souls. She's a very enigmatic goddess, and she's one that a lot of people were drawn to, but were very much afraid of in many ways. And there had been a growing cult around the Morrigan in many witchcraft traditions, and I was drawn to her because of the fear that was surrounding her, and because of the restrictions so many people had put in place around her. I wanted to know what the truth was, and I just had a really wonderful time digging really deeply into these old Irish myths and creating some retellings that might be a little easier for people to read. Say you're on the bus and you're reading on the way to work. Sometimes you may not have the focus for the original text, but perhaps a very good retelling will help you, embrace the story and enjoy it a little bit better. And the depth, and also seeing what these stories can mean for us now, with the acknowledgement that these gods are very different than how they were when they originally were revered. But yeah.
When you decided to write it, what was the inspiration? And I want to ask also about, you said there's a lot of fear based around the Morrigan, and you said everyone, you used some pronouns that I'm not sure, because I've never heard of the Morrigan. So this is new to me. Are you talking about the witch community? Are you talking about Irish culture? Who's the everybody we're talking about here?
Forgive me. Yes, I would say it was the witchcraft community of all over the world, both within Ireland and outside of it. I started approaching the Morrigan because a lot of people warned me not to.
Okay.
They warned me. Yeah, they warned me that if I got involved with her, that I would become very sick, or that I might go insane, or that she would really take me through a very difficult time. I also, and again, because there are so many people that believe that she should be revered in one specific way and shouldn't be revered in others, that I felt that she deserved another look outside of what was becoming a bit of orthodoxy that was surrounding her, and at the same time wanting to give full credit and deference to the original myths that had produced her. So another reason why I wanted to start working on it was when I was traveling a lot and was visiting different witchcraft stores, I would hear that the story that people most, the story that the books that people were most interested in were books on the Morrigan, which I was surprised to hear, because there are a lot of really good books on the Morrigan already on the market. But perhaps people had already read those, or they just their publisher weren't getting them to the demographic that they needed to. So I wrote this one as another resource for people who are interested in getting to know this goddess. I think she's drawing a lot of witches to her. Many witches today would probably consider themselves to be very deity-centric, in belief that they have gods and goddesses that work with them or through them or guide them, and I certainly count myself among them. I'm very much a deity-focused witch. And the Morrigan is drawing a lot of attention these days. I think we, as people around the world, are feeling very frustrated and disempowered. We've had a rise in global fascism, a rejection of democracy, certainly attacks on the climate, and feeling powerless over the state of where the environment is going. So there was a real desire, I think, among many people to embrace the goddess with these sorts of traits.
What do you, when somebody picks up the book, and if they have no knowledge of these ideas or this, the concepts that you're talking about in the book, what do you hope they walk away with?
I hope they walk away with a deep understanding. I mean, I feel like if they pick up the book, the Morgan is already calling to them. And I think that I would hope that they can understand more about what that calling is about.
You obviously have written other books as well. Is there an order in which you prefer people to read your work, or can they pick up any of the ones that happen to interest them and read them in any order?
Oh, they can absolutely pick them up in any order. I have a new one coming out in 2021 called Hecate, the Goddess of Witches. And I think different gods and goddesses, pull to different people. They certainly don't go in sequence. I do share a lot of my personal journey in my books, and so I don't think that's why people are picking up. I think they're picking up the books to read about the goddesses, but my personal journey does come in a bit of sequence there. But I don't think you have to read Bridget before you read the Morgan. I think you should read the book that you want to read. Life is short, so you should read the one that you want to read. One that's calling to you. And
once again, let people know where they can find all of your work.
So my website is CourtneyAWeber.com. Again, I also blog on Patheos. My blog is called Double Toil and Resist. And if people are interested in knowing more about witchcraft, especially life living as a witch, I really encourage people to listen to my podcast, which is called That Witch Life. I record it with my two best friends of like 20-some years, so we've got a lot of old camaraderie there, and we always have on really exceptional guests talking about different ways to practice witchcraft in different walks of life in the witch world. And, again, ask for my books at your local metaphysical or independent bookstore. And if you can't find them there, it's fine to order them online. But just leave me a review. And you can also find me on Twitter at The Cocoa Witch, Instagram, The Cocoa Witch. And I'm also Facebook, Courtney Weber is my author page. And I generally respond pretty quickly. If you ask me a really tough, juicy question, it might take me a couple days to get back to you. But, look forward to hearing from people. And I'm really, really thankful you had me on the show.
Courtney, thank you so much for being here. Very interesting conversation. We look forward to having you back sometime soon.
Anytime.
Beyond Reality Paranormal is hosted by J.V. Johnson and produced by Orion Palmer and Slick Eddie Edwards. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please consider supporting the program either through your podcast platform, click on the link in the description, or on Patreon at Joha Productions. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Paranormal, or you have a recommendation for a guest, contact our producer, Slick Eddie Edwards. Eddie is spelled with a Y at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com.